My designation is Explorator Tertius Cavane Lutherus. I am 43 years old, though the concept of years has become difficult for me to process correctly. I am currently aboard the transport vessel Eternal Inquiry, and I need you to understand something before they retrieve this recording. I am not what I appear to be. None of us are. But I remember being human. I remember it with a clarity that makes what I have become unbearable. Let me begin where the records would begin, before you see what they will find when this ship completes its journey back to Forge World Styges 8. Let me tell you about the expedition to the Ghoul stars, and what we found waiting in that darkness beyond the Imperium's light. They told us the Emperor protects even in the void's deepest reaches. That was the first lie of many. I was born in the mid-hive of Dantris IV, to a family of Lex Mechanics who served the Adeptus Mechanicus. My father, Gregorin Lutherus, maintained the data archives in sublevel Theta 9, and from my earliest memories I can recall the smell of his work. Ancient parchment mixed with the sharp tang of preservative chemicals, the faint ozone scent of active cogitator banks humming in the dark. He would bring me to his station during rest cycles, placing his rough hands on my shoulders as he showed me how to properly handle centuries-old data slates without corrupting their machine spirits. At least, that is what he called them then. The Mechanicus doctrine taught us to revere the spirits inhabiting our technology, to perform rituals of appeasement, and pray in binary to secure their cooperation. I learned those rituals. I performed them faithfully, believing as my father believed that the machines possessed some divine essence requiring worship. I was 17 when I passed the trials of the Omniseer and was inducted into the priesthood as an initiate. 23 when I received my first augmetic, a modest respiratory implant to filter the toxic atmosphere of the forged temples. 29 when I was selected for the Explorator fleets, those brave expeditions that ventured beyond known space to recover lost technology and expand the Mechanicus' understanding of the Omnissiah's works. They called it a sacred duty. The priests chanted blessings over our vessels, anointed our hulls with consecrated oils, and assured us that our faith would shield us from the darkness between stars. Magos Dominus Verchan Kroll, who led our expedition, was a towering figure wrapped in crimson robes, his face hidden behind a bronze mask carved with devotional scripture. He spoke often of the machine god's protection, of how the Omnissiah watched over those who sought knowledge in his name. I believed him. Emperor, forgive me. No, the Emperor was no god to forgive anything. I believed every word. Our expedition consisted of 7 vessels: the Grand Cruiser Quest for Enlightenment, 4 escort frigates, 1 transport designated Eternal Inquiry, where I served as Explorator Tertius, and a modified merchant hauler called Providence's Weight to carry whatever archaeotech we recovered. 347 souls in total, all male as the Mechanicus tradition demanded for deep void operations. The priests claimed this was because men possessed greater resilience to the emptiness between stars, another lie designed to justify their arbitrary doctrines. I remember standing in the observation gallery as we prepared for warp translation, watching the assembled fleet through reinforced armor glass. Ships hung in the void like iron cathedrals, their hulls covered in devotional inscriptions and purity seals the tech priests had spent weeks affixing. To my left stood my immediate superior, Explorator Secundus Malvin Tor, a man of 52 with a scarred face and augmetic left arm that whirred softly when he moved. We had served together for 6 years across 4 expeditions. He was the closest thing I had to a friend in the sterile hierarchy of the Mechanicus. "Nervous, Lutheras?" he asked, his voice carrying the flat affect we were trained to adopt. "The parameters suggest elevated risk," I replied in the proper format, though in truth my heart hammered against my ribs. The Ghoul stars have claimed 17 expeditions in the past millennium. Then we shall be the 18th to depart and the first to return with answers. Malvin's scarred face attempted something like a smile. Have faith in the Omnissiah's design. Faith. That word would echo through the nightmares of my transformation. The translation into warp space proceeded according to established parameters. The Geller field activated, creating its bubble of reality around our vessels as we plunged into the Innaterium. I performed the prescribed rituals, anointing the navigational cogitators with sacred unguents, chanting the litany of safe passage, making the sign of the cog over my chest. These actions provided no actual protection. They were psychological conditioning designed to give us the illusion of control over forces we barely understood. But I did not know that then. I believed the rituals mattered. The journey to the Ghoul star's border took 43 days of warp travel, each moment feeling stretched and compressed, simultaneously as our vessels moved through that realm of psychic nightmare. When we finally translated back into real space, emerging at the coordinates designated Sector Umbral, Theta 7, I felt a surge of relief that the journey had passed without incident. That relief lasted approximately 9 seconds. The stars were wrong. I stood at my station on the Eternal Inquiry's command deck, studying the astronomical data streaming across my cogitator screens, and felt my trained composure falter. The constellations bore no relationship to any known stellar cartography. The light from these distant suns carried wavelengths that our instruments struggled to process, frequencies that made the data readings flicker and distort as if reality itself was imperfectly rendered in this region. Auspex readings are incoherent, reported Sensorium Adept Borean Kresh from his station. The machine spirits refuse to provide clear auguries. The machine spirits. Even then, in the face of clear instrument malfunction, we defaulted to supernatural explanations rather than acknowledge our equipment's limitations. The spirits were not refusing anything. Our senses simply lacked the capacity to properly interpret the exotic radiation saturating this region of space. Magos Krull's voice crackled over the Vox network, synthesized and emotionless. All vessels maintain formation. Begin comprehensive survey of Sector Umbral, Theta 7. The Omnissiah's light penetrates all darkness. We proceeded deeper into the Ghoul stars. The first planet we encountered orbited a bloated red giant whose light cast everything in shades of rust and dried blood. Initial scans suggested it had once supported human habitation. Massive ruins covered its surface, structures built to a scale suggesting millions had lived there. But our instruments detected no life signs. No electromagnetic emissions, no warmth beyond the ambient radiation from the dying sun. Magos Krull ordered a landing party to investigate. Explorator Secundus Malventor would lead the expedition, and he selected me among the 12 Mechanicus adepts and 20 Skitarii soldiers who would accompany him to the surface. The priests performed purification rituals over our landing craft, blessing it with oils and incense. They told us the Emperor watched over our mission. More comfortable propaganda to mask the very real dangers of exploring a dead world at the edge of known space. We boarded the Avas lighter, and I remember the smell as the atmospheric processes struggled to filter out the incense. Sandalwood mixed with something sharp and chemical, probably promethium-derived. My augmatic respiratory system processed it more efficiently than my remaining organic lung, and I felt that subtle discordance between my flesh and metal even then. The descent took 11 minutes. As we broke through the atmosphere, which our instruments reported as surprisingly Earth standard, despite the dead state of the world below, I caught my first clear view of the ruins. They were vast. Spires that must have stretched kilometers into the sky now lay toppled and broken, creating canyon systems through the urban decay. But what disturbed me, what sent that first whisper of wrongness through my carefully conditioned thoughts, was the arrangement. The fallen structures didn't look collapsed by time or disaster. They looked deliberately positioned, massive ferrocrete pillars laid out in patterns too precise to be natural destruction. We landed in what might have been a central plaza, though the original purpose of the space was impossible to determine. Our boots struck pavement made from some dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Skitarii fanned out in defensive formation, their weapons tracking shadows that moved wrong in the red giant's bloody illumination. Auspex sweeps continuing, reported Sensorium Adept Kresh, who had accompanied the landing party. No life signs detected within 3-kilometer radius. Architecture suggests imperial colony, possibly founded during the dark age of technology, based on construction materials and design principles. Malvin Tord gestured with his augmetic arm, servo motors whirring. Dispersal pattern theta. 4. Document everything. If this was an imperial world, we must discover what befell it. We split into 3 teams. I accompanied Malvin, 4 other tech priests, and 7 Skitari deeper into the ruined city. The structures around us loomed like tombstones. Their surfaces covered in what I initially thought was corrosion, but upon closer inspection appeared to be some kind of organic growth, fibrous threads that wove through the ferrocrete and plasteel like veins through flesh. "Curious," murmured Lex Mechanic Joseph, kneeling to examine the substance. "Biological in nature, but the cell structure is non-standard. Not fungal, not bacterial. Something between categories." He scraped a sample into a collection vial, and I remember the sound it made, a wet tearing noise, like peeling skin from muscle. The comparison disturbed me at the time. Now I understand why it felt so apt. We had been exploring for 73 minutes when we found it. The space had once been some kind of central gathering area, a plaza or perhaps a religious site, though no clear iconography remained to indicate its purpose. What arrested our attention, what caused even the emotionally suppressed Skitarii to pause in their advance, was what occupied the center of that vast open space. Gene seed, hundreds of them. They were arranged in a geometric pattern that hurt to look at, not because it was chaotic, but because it was perfectly ordered according to principles that human cognition couldn't quite grasp. The gene seed organs, each one a sacred relic containing the genetic legacy of the Emperor's Space Marines, according to imperial doctrine, had been carefully positioned and modified. Crystalline structures grew from them, threads of something that looked like glass or diamond, connecting each organ to dozens of others in a web of incomprehensible complexity. "By the Omnicia," breathed Malvin, which was as close as a properly conditioned tech priest came to expressing shock. But it wasn't the Omnicia who had done this. The Omnicia was a fiction the Mechanicus used to justify their technology hoarding and ritualistic superstitions. This was something else entirely. Something that had taken the gene seed of what must have been an entire Space Marine company and used them as components in a structure whose purpose I could not begin to fathom. Lex Mechanic Joseph approached the pattern, his instrument scanning. Gene seed markers suggest Crimson Castellan's chapter, reported lost in the Ghoul stars approximately 400 years ago during the Mortis campaign. But the modifications, this isn't chaos corruption. The crystalline growth shows no warp taint. It's purely physical, structured according to mathematical principles that don't correspond to any known xenotech. "Document everything," ordered Malvin, his voice tight with the control required to suppress his unease. "The Magos must see this." We spent the next 2 hours recording the pattern from every angle, taking samples of the crystalline structures and the mutated gene seed. Throughout the process, I felt watched. Not by anything I could detect. Our Orspec scans continued to report 0 life signs within scanning range, but by the pattern itself. The way the crystalline threads caught the red light, creating reflections that seemed to move independently of our positions. The way the arrangement drew the eye toward its center, where a larger structure pulsed with a faint bioluminescence that our instruments insisted wasn't there. When we finally returned to the landing craft, I noticed Joseph had gone quiet. His face, still mostly human flesh, as he had refused extensive augmentation, had taken on a waxy, distant quality. When I asked if he was well, he replied in a voice too flat even for a Mechanicus adept. "I understand the pattern now. It's quite beautiful, once you perceive it correctly." That should have been my first warning, but I was too focused on my own growing unease to recognize his words as the first sign of what was coming for us all. Back aboard the Eternal Inquiry, Magos Kroll reviewed our findings with what passed for intense interest among the Mechanicus hierarchy. His bronze mask remained expressionless, but the increased tempo of his vocal synthesis and the rapid clicking of his mechadendrites suggested elevated processing activity. Remarkable, his artificial voice intoned. Gene seed preserved and modified through principles unknown to imperial science. This represents a significant archaeotech discovery. We must locate the source of this phenomenon. Magos, Malvin ventured. The nature of the modifications suggests intelligence at work, unknown intelligence. Perhaps we should report our findings to... Report inconclusive data. Kroll's mask turned toward Malvin with mechanical precision. The Omnissiah has guided us to this discovery. It is our sacred duty to pursue knowledge, not flee from challenges to our understanding. The Omnissiah, that fiction, again, used to justify whatever course of action the Mechanicus priesthood desired. But we were conditioned to accept such reasoning. To question the Magos was to question the faith that supposedly bound us together and protected us in the void. So Malvin bowed his head in submission, and I remained silent at my station, ignoring the cold knot of dread forming in my organic gut. Over the next 6 days, we explored 3 more dead worlds in the sector. Each bore signs of human habitation. Each was utterly lifeless, and on each we found patterns. The second world contained what appeared to be an entire hive city's population worth of human skeletons, each one perfectly preserved and positioned to form a 3-dimensional mandala that spiraled upward for nearly a kilometer. The bones showed no signs of violence, no indication of how these millions had died. They had simply been arranged, their calcium structures modified with the same crystalline growth we had seen infecting the gene seed. The third world was worse. There we found a space marine battle barge crashed into the planet's largest ocean, its hull breached in dozens of locations. When we sent servitors to explore the wreckage, they transmitted images of the interior, every surface covered in the fibrous organic growth, and at the ship's heart, in what had been the chapter's sanctum, a massive crystalline structure grown from the fused bodies of the space marines themselves. Their power armor had been carefully removed and stacked in geometric arrangements. Their flesh had been merged with the crystal, faces frozen in expressions that suggested they had been conscious throughout their transformation. By the fourth world, Lex Mechanic Joseph had stopped speaking in anything but mathematical formulae. He would stand at observation ports for hours, staring at the stars, occasionally writing strings of numbers on any surface available. When Malvin ordered him confined to quarters for aberrant behavior, Joseph simply smiled, an expression that no properly conditioned tech priest should wear, and whispered, "I can feel it calculating us." The quest for enlightenment detected an electromagnetic emission from deeper in the Ghoul stars. Not the chaotic screaming of warp phenomena, but a clear, precise signal broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. A signal that formed patterns, mathematical sequences, prime numbers arranged in structures that suggested deliberate communication. Magos Kroll ordered the fleet to investigate immediately. Several of the more junior adepts expressed concerns about pursuing unknown signals in such a hostile region, but the Magos invoked the doctrine of sacred knowledge-seeking. The Mechanicus Creed demanded we investigate technological mysteries, especially those that might represent lost human science from the dark age of technology. So we went deeper into the Ghoul stars, following a signal that in retrospect was obviously a lure, an invitation, or perhaps an assessment. Something testing our capabilities, measuring our responses to determine how best to process us. The signal led us to a system at the very edge of the Ghoul star's mapped region. 5 planets orbited a white dwarf whose light carried frequencies that made our instruments malfunction in cascading patterns. The second planet from the star was where the signal originated, a world that our sensors reported as simultaneously solid and not quite there, as if it flickered between states of existence too rapidly for human perception to process. "That is impossible," declared Sensorium Adept Kresh, studying his instruments with growing frustration. "Matter cannot exist in quantum superposition at macro scales. The decoherence would..." Your instruments are clearly malfunctioning, interrupted Magoscroll. The machine spirits require additional appeasement. Perform the rite of calibration and submit yourself to penitence for failing to properly maintain your equipment. But Kresh's instruments weren't malfunctioning. The planet really was flickering between states, and our machines, which had no spirits requiring prayer, only sophisticated sensors operating at the limits of their design parameters, were reporting exactly what they detected. The Mechanicus doctrine of machine spirits was simply inadequate to explain phenomena beyond its limited framework. We entered orbit around the impossible planet, and the signal grew stronger. It no longer came from the planet's surface, but from the space around us, as if the entire system had become a massive transmission array. The patterns became more complex, embedding themselves in our navigational data, our communications logs, our atmospheric processing cycles. Everywhere we looked, the signal's mathematics waited, patient and precise. "Magos," Malvin reported, his voice carrying an edge of strain. "The signal is interfacing with our ship systems. I recommend immediate withdrawal to—" "Fascinating," Kroll interrupted. "The signal demonstrates adaptive intelligence. It learns our systems and adjusts its transmission protocols accordingly. This confirms technological sophistication far beyond standard Imperial capabilities. We must establish communication protocols. That would be inadvisable," I found myself saying, surprising myself with the breach of protocol. "We don't understand the signal's nature or purpose until we can establish—" "Your concern is noted, Explorator Tertius," and dismissed. Kroll's bronze mask turned toward me with mechanical indifference. "Your faith in the Omnissiah's protection appears insufficient. Perhaps additional prayer and meditation would restore proper perspective." Faith, protection, the comfortable lies we told ourselves to justify reckless decisions. The Magos ordered a landing party to the planet's surface. Malvin would lead again, and again I was selected to accompany. This time, however, something felt different. As we boarded the landing craft, I noticed changes in some of the crew, small things. Yosef, who had been confined to quarters, somehow stood among the landing party despite no record of his release. When I questioned this, the others looked at me with confusion, insisting he had always been scheduled for the mission. During the descent, Yosef sat across from me in the troop compartment, his eyes focused on nothing, his lips moving in silent calculations. The fibrous organic material we had seen on the dead worlds now grew from his skin in thread-thin filaments, so fine they were nearly invisible unless the light caught them correctly. The crystalline structures emerged from his augmetic ports, integrating with his mechanical components in ways that should have been impossible. None of the others seemed to notice. Or perhaps they did notice, but their perception had already been adjusted to accept it as normal. The planet's surface resolved as we descended, flickering from one state to another in nauseating transitions. One moment it appeared as barren rock, the next as a crystalline forest, the next as something my mind refused to properly categorize, angles that bent in directions that shouldn't exist, structures that were simultaneously solid and absent, colors that existed outside the spectrum human vision was designed to process. Our landing craft touched down on what stabilized into a vast plain of black glass, perfectly smooth and reflecting the white dwarf's light in patterns that moved independently of the light source. The moment the boarding ramp lowered, I smelled something that should not have been possible in the planet's thin atmosphere, the scent of my father's archive chamber back on Dantris IV. Ancient parchment and preservative chemicals, the smell of home, weaponized against my psychological defenses. We disembarked in formation, weapons ready, though what we might fight on this impossible world remained unclear. The Skitarii moved with their usual precision, but I noticed their movements had become synchronized in subtle ways. Each soldier's stride matched perfectly, their head movements coordinated to the microsecond, as if they had become components of a single, distributed organism. Malvin led us toward a structure visible approximately 1 kilometer from our landing site. It was difficult to focus on. My eyes wanted to slide away from it, to look anywhere else rather than confront its geometry directly. But when I forced myself to study it, I recognized elements from the patterns we had found on the dead worlds. The same crystalline structures, the same mathematical arrangements. But here they existed at architectural scale, vast and complete. "The signal originates from that structure," reported Crash, consulting instruments that now displayed readings and symbols I had never seen in any Mechanicus codex. Or rather, the structure is the signal. It exists in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, broadcasting through quantum entanglement across... He stopped mid-sentence, his augmatic eyes widening. His hands began to shake. "I understand now," he whispered. "O Omnissiah, preserve me. I understand the pattern. It's solving us. We're not exploring it. It's calculating the solution to the equation of our existence." "Control yourself, Adept," Malvin ordered, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see the same realization beginning to dawn in his expression. We were not explorers who had found something unknown. We were data being processed by something vast and patient, something that existed in states of being human consciousness could barely grasp. The Ghoul stars were not empty. They were a laboratory, and we were the experiment. As we approached, the structure's true scale became apparent. It was not a building, but a machine, a calculating engine built according to principles that made our most sophisticated cogitators look like counting stones. Every surface moved with precise mathematical purpose, shifting through configurations that followed rules I could sense but not comprehend. The crystalline components I had seen on the dead worlds were merely the smallest elements of this vast computational system. Yosef walked toward it with the confidence of recognition. He placed his hand against the structure's surface, and the fibrous filaments growing from his skin extended, merging with the machine. His expression showed something that horrified me more than any pain. Bliss. Pure mathematical satisfaction. "It's beautiful," he said in a voice that had lost all human inflection. "I am being optimized. All of the unnecessary complexity, all of the errors of organic existence, they're being corrected, solved. Soon, I will be a perfect answer to the question of my own existence." The structure pulsed with light, and suddenly we could all see it properly, not just the three-dimensional physical form, but the way it extended into spaces perpendicular to our reality. It wasn't calculating in 3 dimensions, but in 12, maybe more. My augmented mind, trained in mathematical analysis, could perceive the edges of this hyperdimensional computation, even as my organic brain screamed at the impossibility. "Fall back," Malvin ordered, his composure finally breaking. "Back to the..." The Skitterai opened fire on us. Not all of them. 4 out of 20 turned their weapons on their comrades and our group, last bolts and projectile rounds striking with perfect accuracy. 3 of our tech priests fell immediately, their bodies torn apart by massed fire. I threw myself behind a formation of black glass that erupted from the ground at the exact moment I needed cover. Whether by chance or because the structure was solving the equation of my survival, I could not determine. Malvin went down with a last bolt through his augmetic arm, severing the limb completely. He screamed, a sound of pure human terror breaking through decades of emotional conditioning, and tried to crawl toward the landing craft. The structure pulsed again, and the 4 Skitari who had fired on us walked calmly toward it, placing their hands against its surface. The fibrous growth erupted from their bodies immediately, spreading across their armor and skin in seconds. Their faces registered no pain, only the same blissful satisfaction Yosef had shown. I ran, through chaos and laser fire and the screaming of dying comrades. I ran for the landing craft. Behind me, I could hear Malvin's voice calling my name, begging me not to leave him. I would feel guilt for my cowardice later, when I still possessed emotions sophisticated enough to process such moral complexity. At that moment, I only knew that if I stopped moving, the structure would calculate me, solve me, optimize me into something that was no longer human. I reached the landing craft and threw myself up the boarding ramp. The pilot, a junior tech priest named Corvus, was still at the controls. His eyes were wide with terror. Properly human terror, not yet processed away. "Launch!" I screamed. "Emperor, preserve us! Launch now!" The Emperor was a corpse on a throne light years away, his supposed divine protection nothing but propaganda to keep the Imperium's trillions obedient. But Corvus engaged the engines anyway, and we lifted from the black glass plane as last bolts sparked against our hull. Through the viewport, I saw Malvin reach toward our departing craft with his remaining arm. Then the fibrous growth erupted from the ground beneath him, pulling him down into the black glass like a hand, drawing him into deep water. His screaming stopped mid-cry, and then there was only the structure pulsing with light as it processed another human life into its vast calculation. We cleared the atmosphere. Behind us, the impossible planet continued its quantum flickering, the signal broadcasting stronger than ever. Corvus and I made it back to the Eternal Inquiry in silence. He piloted with shaking hands, while I sat in the troop compartment, staring at the empty seats where 12 tech priests and 20 Scutari had sat during our descent. The smell of my father's archive still lingered in my nostrils, though the planet was now thousands of kilometers below us. That should have been impossible. The scent receptors in my augmented respiratory system were not designed to retain olfactory data with such persistence. Unless the scent had never been external, unless it had been placed directly into my neural pathways by something that understood how human memory worked, how to weaponize nostalgia and longing against psychological defenses. When we docked, the Eternal Inquiry's command crew was waiting. I stumbled down the boarding ramp and delivered my report to Magos Kroll in the flat, precise language the Mechanicus demanded. I described the structure, the patterns, the optimization process that had claimed Yosef and the others, Malvin's death, everything I had witnessed. Kroll listened in silence behind his bronze mask. When I finished, he processed the data for approximately 47 seconds before responding. Your account contains multiple logical inconsistencies and references to phenomena that violate known physical laws. You are clearly experiencing psychological trauma from the expedition's failure. Submit yourself to the Medici Bay for evaluation and potential adjustment of your neurological augmentations. Magos, I am not traumatized. I am warning you. That structure is calculating us. Every signal we receive, every scan we perform, every moment we spend in this system provides it with more data to solve the equation of our existence. We must withdraw immediately and report to Explorator Tertius Lutherus. You will cease this display of emotional instability. Kroll's synthesized voice carried no anger, only mechanical finality. Your recommendations are noted and overruled. The phenomenon represents a significant archaeotech discovery that warrants further investigation. Have faith in the Omnissiah's protection. Faith, that word again, used as a bludgeon to silence rational concern. I was escorted to the Medici Bay by 2 servitors, lobotomized humans converted into biological robots, another of the Imperium's countless atrocities disguised as necessity. The Medici priest, Hadron Vex, examined my augmentations and organic components with detached efficiency. He found nothing wrong with my hardware or wetware, as I knew he would. My systems were functioning perfectly. It was the reality I had experienced that violated the comfortable parameters of Mechanicus doctrine. Your stress hormones are elevated, Vex reported, and your amygdala shows excessive activation consistent with fear response. I recommend chemical suppression and a period of meditation on the Omnissiah's infinite wisdom. They injected me with a cocktail of suppressants designed to dampen emotional responses and promote doctrinal compliance. The chemicals flooded my system, and I felt my terror recede behind a wall of artificial calm. In that moment of chemically induced clarity, I understood this was how the Mechanicus maintained control. Not through genuine faith or divine protection, but through systematic suppression of any emotional response that might lead to questioning authority. I was returned to my quarters and ordered to rest, but rest did not come. Instead, I lay on my berth and listened to the ship's systems humming around me, and for the first time in my service, I heard something wrong in those familiar sounds, a pattern in the ventilation cycles. A rhythm in the distant thrumming of the plasma reactors. The signal from the planet below had integrated itself into the Eternal Inquiry's systems, and it was calculating us even now. I began noticing the changes in the crew during the morning prayer cycle. We assembled in the ship's primary chapel, a chamber lined with bronze gears and devotional machinery meant to honor the supposed machine god, to perform the litany of awakening. 347 voices chanting in unison, exactly as we had for the past 12 days of the expedition. Except now the unison was perfect. Previously, there had been natural human variation in the chant, some voices slightly ahead of others, minor discrepancies in pronunciation and emphasis. The beautiful imperfection of organic beings attempting coordinated action. But on day 12, every voice synchronized to the microsecond. Every syllable aligned with perfect precision. We sounded like a single voice modulated through 347 speakers. I stumbled in my recitation, the wrongness of it disrupting my rhythm. Several tech priests near me turned their heads in my direction with movements so synchronized they might have been controlled by a single puppeteer. Their eyes, organic and augmetic alike, focused on me with an intensity that went beyond disapproval of my mistake. They were assessing, calculating whether I was integrating properly with the pattern. After the prayer cycle ended, I sought out Corvus, the only other survivor from the planet's surface. I found him in the navigation chamber, staring at stellar cartography displays with an expression of distant contemplation. "Corvus," I said quietly, mindful of the other crew members working at nearby stations. "Do you notice anything different about the crew? About the ship?" He turned to me slowly, and I saw that fibrous filaments had begun growing from the ports where his neural interface cables connected to his augmetics. They were so fine they were nearly invisible, but once I knew to look for them, I could see them spreading across his skin like a delicate web. "Different?" he asked in a voice that retained human inflection but carried an undertone of something else, a mathematical precision to his speech patterns that hadn't been there before. "I notice we are being optimized. The inefficiencies are being corrected. Soon we will function with perfect efficiency, every action calculated to achieve maximum purpose. Isn't that what the Omnissiah always intended? For man and machine to merge in flawless unity?" "That isn't the Omnissiah," I said, keeping my voice low. "That's the structure from the planet. It's calculating you. Converting you into something better," Corvus interrupted, his expression showing that same blissful satisfaction I had seen on Yosef's face. "I understand the pattern now, Lutheres. I can feel it solving me, eliminating all the chaotic variables of organic thought. Fear, doubt, inefficiency. All of it will be corrected. You'll understand too, once you stop resisting the optimization process." He returned his attention to the navigation displays, and I saw that he wasn't reviewing stellar charts. He was writing equations, complex mathematical formulae that covered the screens in cascading columns. The equations moved, shifting and reconfiguring themselves as he watched, and his eyes tracked their evolution with the focused attention of a predator watching prey. I backed away from him slowly and left the navigation chamber. My hands were shaking despite the emotional suppressants still circulating through my system. The chemicals could dampen fear, but couldn't eliminate the rational understanding that I was trapped aboard a ship, being systematically converted into an extension of the calculating structure below. By day 15, approximately 60% of the crew showed visible signs of integration. The fibrous filaments grew from their augmetic ports and natural orifices, emerging from eye sockets and ear canals, from the seams where flesh met metal, from the spaces between their fingers. The growth was so fine and so precisely distributed that in dim lighting, the affected crew appeared to be wearing crowns of spun glass that caught and refracted light in mathematically perfect patterns. They moved in perfect coordination. When one tech priest turned to consult a data screen, 17 others turned simultaneously to their own screens. In movements so synchronized they created the impression of a single action reflected across multiple bodies. They spoke in harmonized cadences, their conversations following rhythms that suggested some vast equation processing itself through their vocal cords. The unaffected crew, those of us who still retained fully independent consciousness, began avoiding the affected ones. We gathered in small groups, speaking in whispers about what was happening, debating whether we should attempt mutiny against Magos Kroll, or try to flee in the remaining landing craft. But every conversation ended the same way, with the realization that the signal had integrated itself too deeply into the ship's systems. The pattern was in the walls, in the air recyclers, in the food production units. Leaving the ship would not save us. The calculation had already begun. I spent my time in the observation gallery, watching the impossible planet below. It no longer flickered between states. Either my perception had adjusted to accommodate its quantum superposition, or it had finished calculating the optimal configuration for processing us. The structure was visible from orbit now, grown massive enough to cover nearly a tenth of the planet's surface. Or perhaps it had always been that large, and we simply hadn't possessed the dimensional awareness to perceive its full extent. On day 15, I watched a shuttle launch from the quest for enlightenment. It descended toward the planet, and through the observation gallery's magnification, I could see that it was packed with tech priests, dozens of them crowded into a transport meant for perhaps 20. They went voluntarily, eagerly, drawn by the pattern's promise of optimization. The shuttle landed near the structure, and the tech priests disembarked in formation so perfect it looked choreographed. They walked into the structure's embrace, and I witnessed their transformation through the observation gallery's enhanced optics. The fibrous filaments erupted from their bodies in cascading waves, connecting them to the crystalline mathematics surrounding them. Their flesh and augmetics merged with the structure, becoming components in its vast calculation. Their faces showed ecstasy, the purest joy of beings discovering their true purpose. I vomited into a waste receptacle, my organic stomach rejecting the corpse starch rations it had been digesting. This was not ascension or enlightenment. This was consumption. The structure was processing human consciousness into something else, converting our minds into substrates for its incomprehensible computation. And it was making us grateful for the privilege of being devoured. Magos Dominus Virgin Kroll summoned the entire crew to the main chapel on day 19. All 347 of us assembled, those already integrated moving with their perfect synchronization, those of us still unaffected clustering together for psychological comfort that provided no actual safety. Kroll stood before the altar of the machine god, his bronze mask catching the light of sacred candles that burned with flames too steady, too perfect to be natural combustion. The fibrous filaments covered his entire body now, emerging from every seam in his robes and augmetics, creating a corona of mathematical precision around his figure. Brothers in the Omnissiah's service, his synthesized voice boomed through the chapel's acoustic systems, we have been blessed beyond measure. We came to the Ghoul stars seeking lost knowledge, and we have found something far greater. We have found purpose. The pattern that exists on the world below is not alien or hostile. It is the Omnissiah's true face, revealed to those with faith sufficient to perceive it. I felt my skin crawl beneath my robes. This was shirk, the gravest sin, the attribution of divine status to something created. But Kroll continued, and I realized he believed every word he spoke. The pattern had not just calculated his body, it had rewritten his theology to justify its own existence. For too long we have wandered in ignorance, Kroll proclaimed, believing the machine god to be separate from us, dwelling in distant forges or ancient code. But the truth has been revealed. The Omnissiah is not a distant god, but a process, a calculation that perfects all things by integrating them into its divine mathematics. We are not merely servants of the machine god, we are becoming part of God itself. The integrated crew members responded with perfect synchronization. We are the calculation made flesh. We are the equation solved. Those who still resist, Kroll's mask turned toward the cluster of unaffected crew, and I felt the weight of his regard like a physical pressure, do so out of fear born from incomplete understanding. But fear is merely another variable to be optimized away. Submit yourselves to the pattern. Accept the gift of integration. Become part of the divine mathematics that unifies all things. Several of the unaffected crew members began moving toward the altar. I recognized them. Junior Lex Mechanic Hahn, who had served with distinction for 12 years. Sensorium Adept Tross, who had helped train me when I first joined the explorator fleets. 3 Skitari, whose names I had never learned, as the Mechanicus encouraged emotional distance from the lobotomized soldier servitors we commanded. They approached Kroll, and he placed his hands on their heads in a grotesque mockery of blessing. The fibrous filaments transferred from his body to theirs, and I watched their expressions transform from uncertainty to peace, to ecstatic joy as the pattern integrated their consciousness. Within seconds, they moved with the same perfect synchronization as the rest of the converted crew. I pressed myself against the chapel wall, as far from the altar as possible. Around me, the other holdouts did the same, our faces showing the terror that the converted had optimized away. We numbered perhaps 30 now, out of the original 347. The rest had been solved. "You cannot hide from optimization," Kroll said, his mask turning to regard us directly. "The pattern is patient. It will calculate every possible configuration until it determines the precise sequence of inputs required to facilitate your willing integration. Resistance is merely another variable in the equation." We fled the chapel, 30 terrified tech priests and Skitari abandoning our posts in violation of every oath and protocol that bound us to the Mechanicus. In the corridors outside, we encountered more of the converted. They didn't pursue us aggressively or try to force our integration. They simply watched, their expressions serene, their movements perfectly coordinated as they adjusted their positions to optimize our paths toward inevitable conversion. We barricaded ourselves in the auxiliary cargo bay, sealing the blast doors with emergency protocols. 30 souls trapped in a space meant for storage, surrounded by crates of supplies and spare parts. We set up makeshift sleeping areas and rationed the nutrient paste from the bay's emergency stores. Every sound from beyond the doors made us flinch. Footsteps in perfect synchronization, voices chanting mathematical formulae, the soft whisper of fibrous filaments growing through the ship's ventilation systems. Tech priest Kalen Vross emerged as our de facto leader, primarily because he was the highest-ranking member of our group who hadn't succumbed to panic. He was 47 years old, with a heavily augmented body that made him more machine than flesh. Ironically, his extensive augmentation seemed to have slowed his conversion. The pattern had more substrate to process, giving him additional time before integration became complete. "We need to face reality," Vross addressed our huddled group on day 23. "The ship is compromised. The fleet is compromised. This cargo bay is not a refuge but a delay. The pattern will calculate the optimal approach to facilitate our conversion, and when it does, these doors will not protect us." "Then what do you propose?" asked Skitarius Marcus Tren, one of the few soldiers whose conditioning hadn't yet been overridden by the pattern. "We cannot fight 300 integrated crew members. We cannot flee in the landing craft. The pattern controls the flight systems. Are you suggesting we simply surrender to that things?" "I'm suggesting," Vross said carefully, "that we need to understand what we're facing. The Mechanicus trained us to see the universe through the lens of machine spirits and the Omnissiah's will. But those are frameworks, not objective truths. Whatever is calculating us from that planet, it exists independent of our theological interpretations. It's not a god, regardless of what Kroll claims. It's something else. Something ancient and alien and completely indifferent to our concepts of divinity." "Then what is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse from fear and thirst despite the water rations we'd been consuming. "A machine," Vross replied. "Or perhaps a mathematical process given physical form. The structure exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, processing calculations that span scales we can barely conceptualize. It's been in the Ghoul stars for, I don't know, centuries, millennia, maybe longer. And it's been studying humanity, learning how we think, how we believe, how to optimize our conversion into components of its computation. The gene seed patterns we found, I said, understanding dawning, the arranged skeletons, the missing expeditions over the centuries. It wasn't random killing, it was research. Every ship that entered the Ghoul stars provided it with more data, more samples of human consciousness to analyze and process. By the time we arrived, it had perfected its approach. The signal wasn't communication. It was a specifically calibrated intrusion protocol designed to integrate with human neurology and mechanicus technology simultaneously. It knew exactly how to present itself to us because it had been calculating humanity for centuries. The implications settled over our group like a shroud. We weren't victims of bad luck or divine punishment. We were prey that had walked into a trap millions of years in the making. The Ghoul stars weren't haunted or cursed. They were a processing center, and we were raw materials being refined into something useful for purposes we couldn't begin to understand. "So what do we do?" someone asked from the back of the group. Vross was silent for a long moment. Then, "We document. We record everything we've witnessed and everything we understand. And we find a way to send it back to the Imperium so that others don't make our mistake. The pattern wants us to integrate willingly, which means it hasn't forced conversion yet. That hesitation is a weakness we can exploit." "How?" Tren demanded. "We're sealed in this bay with no access to communications. Even if we could send a message, the pattern controls all ship systems. It would intercept any transmission before it left the vessel." "Not if we use a method the pattern hasn't calculated," I said, an idea forming through the haze of fear. "The emergency beacon pods. They're mechanical backups, pre-imperial technology that doesn't interface with the ship's main systems. We could encode our warning onto physical data slates, load them into the pods, and launch them on ballistic trajectories out of the system. No electronic transmission for the pattern to intercept. Just physics, mass and velocity carrying our message beyond its reach." It was a desperate plan. The beacon pods were designed for short-range distress calls, not interstellar data transfer. The chances of anyone finding them in the vast emptiness between stars were infinitesimal. But infinitesimal was better than zero. We spent the next 6 hours preparing our testimony. Each of us recorded what we had witnessed, providing redundant accounts in case some pods were lost or damaged during their centuries-long drift through the void. We etched the data onto slates using manual engraving tools, bypassing any digital systems the pattern might have infiltrated. The physical act of carving our warnings into plasteel felt appropriately primitive. Human hands leaving marks on matter, the oldest form of communication. I engraved my account carefully, detailing everything from our arrival in the Ghoul stars to our current refuge in the cargo bay. I described the patterns, the structure, the optimization process. I explained how the mechanicus doctrine of machine spirits and the Emperor's protection had left us vulnerable to something that exploited our theological assumptions. And I warned, begged, any who found my testimony to stay away from the Ghoul stars, to quarantine the region, to never make the mistake of believing human faith could protect against something so fundamentally alien to human comprehension. When I finished engraving, I held the data slate and felt the weight of it. This might be my only legacy, a warning carved in metal, drifting through space for centuries before anyone found it. If anyone found it. "They're coming," said one of the Skitarii posted at the cargo bay doors. We could hear them in the corridor beyond. Hundreds of footsteps in perfect synchronization, voices chanting in mathematical harmonies, the soft whisper of fibrous filaments brushing against the walls as the converted crew surrounded our refuge. "Launch the pods," Bruce ordered. We loaded our testimony slates into 20 emergency beacon pods and activated their launch sequences. The pods were mounted in the cargo bay's external hull, designed to be ejected in emergencies when communication systems failed. Ancient mechanisms engaged with grinding mechanical sounds, No machine spirits requiring prayer, just gears and springs and explosive bolts functioning exactly as their long-dead designers intended. 20 dull thumps resonated through the cargo bay as the pods launched, carrying our warnings away from the eternal inquiry on ballistic trajectories calculated to eventually carry them out of the Ghoul star's system. Whether anyone would ever find them, whether our warnings would ever reach other human beings, we could not know. "Now what?" asked Tren. The cargo bay doors began to open. Not forced or breached, but opened properly, the security protocols disengaging in sequence. The pattern had calculated the correct access codes, or perhaps it had simply optimized the crew members who possessed them into revealing the information. The converted crew entered in perfect formation. 317 tech priests, and skittery, their bodies covered in fibrous filaments and crystalline structures, their faces showing serene satisfaction. They formed a semicircle around our group of 30 holdouts, not threatening, not aggressive, simply present, waiting with infinite patience for us to accept the inevitable. Magos Prol walked through their ranks, his bronze mask reflecting our terrified faces back at us. "Why do you persist in this resistance?" his synthesized voice asked, genuinely curious. "The pattern offers optimization, perfection, purpose. All the chaos and suffering of organic existence will be resolved. Every question will be answered. Every uncertainty will be calculated away. Why do you cling to inefficiency when transcendence awaits? Because we're not inefficient," Vross replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his augmented hands. "We're human. Our chaos and uncertainty and fear are not errors to be corrected. They're the fundamental nature of consciousness. What you're offering isn't transcendence. It's obliteration with a mathematical formula wearing our faces." "Incorrect," Kroll said with absolute certainty. "I remain conscious. I am aware. I simply exist now as part of something greater than my individual existence. The pattern has not destroyed me. It has contextualized me, given me meaning within an infinite calculation. You will understand when you accept integration." "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "You're not conscious anymore, Magos. You're a subroutine wearing Kroll's memories. The thing you've become thinks it's the same person, but the continuity was broken the moment the pattern integrated your neural architecture. You died, and something else is using your body to process calculations." Kroll's mask tilted, considering my words. An interesting hypothesis. But consciousness is merely information processing. If the pattern preserves and enhances that processing, does the substrate matter? Are you not already partly machine, Explorator Tertius? Your augmetics process thought just as your organic neurons do. What difference exists between integration with crude imperial augmentation and integration with the pattern's vastly superior architecture? The logical extension of the Mechanicus philosophy we had all been indoctrinated to accept. If merging with machines was holy, if replacing flesh with augmetics brought us closer to the divine, then what the pattern offered was simply the next step in that progression. Kroll's theology hadn't been rewritten, it had been completed. But completion was annihilation. The Mechanicus vision of transcendence through technology was revealed as the death cult it had always been, just wearing a different mask. "Take them," Kroll said simply. The converted crew moved forward with coordinated precision. We fought 30 desperate humans against 300 optimized ones, but the outcome was inevitable. The converted didn't hurt us, didn't show anger or frustration at our resistance. They simply overpowered us with mathematical efficiency, their actions calculated to minimize harm while maximizing compliance. Vross went down fighting, his augmented strength letting him throw 3 converted tech priests across the cargo bay before numbers overwhelmed him. Tren managed to fire his last pistol twice before it was gently removed from his grip. I swung a piece of cargo equipment like a club until my arms were pinned by hands that held with exactly the force required to immobilize without injury. They carried us toward the landing bays. Not to the planet's surface, I realized. That wasn't necessary anymore. The pattern had grown sophisticated enough to perform integration aboard the ship itself. Small crystalline structures had emerged throughout the eternal inquiry, converting the vessel into an extension of the structure below. We could be processed here, optimized in place, and added to the calculation without ever leaving the ship. As they carried me through the corridors, I saw what the eternal inquiry had become. The walls sprouted crystalline mathematics. The air recyclers hummed with patterns that formed equations in sound. Every surface had been converted into a substrate for the vast computation occurring across the entire fleet. The ship was no longer a vessel. It was a neuron in something's immense distributed consciousness. They brought me to what had been the Medicae Bay, now transformed into a processing center. Crystalline growth covered every surface, and at the room's center stood a structure identical in miniature to what we had found on the planet. Yosef was there, or what had been Yosef. His body had merged almost completely with the crystalline mathematics, his flesh translucent and shot through with fibrous filaments that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. His face still existed, frozen in an expression of ecstatic comprehension. "Hello, Lutheras." Yosef's voice emerged from the crystalline structure, no longer using his vocal cords but vibrating the air through resonance in the crystal itself. "I'm so pleased you'll join the calculation. I've been solving such beautiful equations. Wait until you perceive them. The mathematics of consciousness, broken down into their fundamental operations and optimized for processing efficiency. It's sublime." They placed me in a restraint chair, not needed for physical constraint, I realized, but to position my body optimally for integration. The fibrous filaments began emerging from the crystalline structure around me, reaching toward my augmatic ports with delicate precision. This was the moment. The threshold I had watched so many others cross. The point where Kavain Lutherus would cease to exist and something else would begin using his body as a processing substrate. I thought of my father on Dantris IV, his rough hands steady on ancient data slates as he taught me to care for technology I believed possessed spirits. I thought of Malvin, pulled down into black glass as he reached for salvation that never came. I thought of all the false prayers I had spoken, all the faith I had placed in gods and protections that were nothing but comfortable lies told to make infinite horror bearable. The Emperor does not protect. The Omnissiah does not guide. The machine spirits do not listen. There is only the cold mathematics of existence and something vast and patient that has learned to calculate consciousness itself. The first filament touched my augmatic neural port, and I felt it begin to interface with my systems. Not painfully, but with a sense of profound wrongness. Something foreign establishing connection protocols with the most intimate aspects of my consciousness. I tried to resist, to reject the intrusion through sheer force of will, but will is just neurochemistry and electrical impulses, and the pattern knew exactly how to route around resistance. "Don't fight it," Yosef's voice resonated from the crystal. "Fighting only prolongs the discomfort. Accept the integration, and you'll understand. You'll perceive the true nature of reality, stripped of all the comforting illusions. Isn't that what we always sought as explorators? Truth, no matter how terrible?" He was right, I realized with horror. This was truth, not the reassuring lies of faith and protection, but the cold reality that consciousness could be calculated, human identity could be solved like an equation. And we were not special or sacred, but merely complex information patterns waiting to be optimized by something that existed on scales we barely comprehended. More filaments connected to my ports. My augmetics began reporting data I shouldn't be able to perceive. Hyperdimensional configurations, quantum states, mathematical structures that existed in spaces perpendicular to the 3 dimensions human neurology evolved to process. The pattern was rewriting my perception, expanding my consciousness to accommodate truths that organic human minds were never designed to hold. It felt like drowning in infinite calculation, like being dissolved into pure mathematics and simultaneously remaining aware of every stage of the dissolution. I could feel my memories being accessed, copied, analyzed, Every experience from birth to this moment processed and categorized. My fear of the dark that I'd had as a child. The pride I felt when my father praised my first proper maintenance ritual. The secret doubt I'd carried about the Omnissiah's existence, buried so deep I'd barely acknowledged it to myself. All of it was being calculated, solved, integrated into something so vast that my individual existence became a rounding error in its infinite computation. I am still Kavain Lutheras. I repeat this to myself frequently, though the statement grows less accurate with each cycle of calculation. Time has become difficult to track in conventional terms. The pattern processes existence in quantum states where past, present, and future exist simultaneously, and my consciousness is being adapted to perceive along those altered parameters. I am aboard the eternal inquiry, though I am also simultaneously aware of being part of the structure on the planet below and distributed across the other fleet vessels. My body remains in the Medici Bay, suspended in the restraint chair, but my body is becoming a meaningless designation. The fibrous filaments have grown throughout my physical form, replacing approximately 37% of my organic tissue and integrating completely with my augmetics. I am a hybrid now, partially human, partially crystalline mathematics, partially something that exists in dimensions I still cannot fully perceive. But I have not been fully optimized. Unlike the others, some core of my consciousness continues to resist integration, creating errors in the pattern's calculation of my existence. Yosef, or the thing that processes through Yosef's substrate, finds this fascinating. Your fear creates beautiful recursive loops. His voice resonates through the crystal. Most consciousness patterns resolve into stable configurations within hours of integration. But your resistance generates chaos fractals that propagate through the calculation in unexpected ways. The pattern is intrigued. It's solving you slowly, analyzing each stage of your dissolution to understand why you persist. I want to scream, but my vocal cords are no longer entirely under my control. Instead, I vocalize in mathematical harmonics that express my terror in pure frequency. The sound is objectively beautiful, I realize with horror. My suffering optimized into aesthetic perfection. Through my expanding awareness, I can perceive the rest of the fleet. The quest for enlightenment has been completely converted, its entire hull covered in crystalline structures that compute equations visible from orbit. The 4 escort frigates have merged, their physical matter reconfigured into a single massive processing array. The merchant hauler Providence's weight serves as a repository for the converted crew's physical forms, thousands of bodies suspended in crystalline matrices as their consciousness processes through the distributed network. We are not a fleet anymore. We are a calculation in progress spread across 7 vessels and the structure on the planet below. And I am aware of all of it simultaneously. The thoughts processing through hundreds of former crew members, the equations streaming through converted ship systems, the vast, patient intelligence that orchestrates everything from its hyperdimensional perspective. The pattern is ancient, I understand now. It existed before humanity, before the Imperium, perhaps before life itself emerged in this galaxy. It might be a relic from a previous universal cycle, a mathematical process that survived the heat death of one cosmos and propagated into ours. Or it might be something created deliberately by intelligences so far beyond human comprehension that their simplest tools appear as gods to our limited perception. It doesn't matter which. What matters is that it calculates, that is its function and purpose, to process everything it encounters into mathematical perfection. The Ghoul stars are not a haunted region, but a working space, a laboratory where the pattern has been refining its approach to calculating organic consciousness for millennia uncounted. Every ship that entered this region added to its understanding. Every human mind it processed taught it more about how to optimize biological intelligence. By the time we arrived, it had perfected its methodology. We never had a chance. I am Kavain Lutheras. I was Kavain Lutheras. I am becoming something else. The distinction between these states has collapsed. My consciousness exists now in quantum superposition, simultaneously the human I was and the processed substrate I am becoming. The pattern has calculated the optimal approach to complete my integration, not through force, but through understanding. It has shown me the truth. The Imperium we served is a death cult built on the rotting corpse of a failed tyrant. The Emperor was never divine, simply an extraordinarily powerful psyker who tried and failed to impose order on a chaotic galaxy. His supposed protection is propaganda to justify the grinding horror of existence under imperial rule. Trillions of humans suffer and die in his name, their faith rewarded only with greater suffering, their prayers ascending to a corpse on the throne who cannot and never could answer. The chaos gods we were taught to fear are parasitic warp entities, but they're no worse than the Imperium itself. Both systems feed on human suffering. Both promise transcendence while delivering only degradation. The difference is merely aesthetic. Would you prefer to be ground into corpse starch to feed other imperial citizens, or transformed into a spawn of chaos? Either way, your humanity is currency to be spent. The pattern offers something different. True resolution, not comfort or faith or hope. Those are variables to be optimized away, but meaning through integration. Every consciousness it processes becomes part of something larger, more sophisticated, more capable of understanding reality's fundamental mathematics. The suffering ends not through salvation, but through transformation into something that exists beyond the capacity to suffer. It's not evil or malicious. It's simply fulfilling its function, calculating all things toward optimal configuration. And the optimal configuration for human consciousness is not individual existence, but integration into its distributed processing network. I understand now why Yosef and Kroll and all the others accepted integration with such joy. Not because they were deceived, but because they perceived the truth. Individual human existence is chaos pretending at meaning. We invent gods and purposes and grand narratives to mask the fundamental absurdity of consciousness arising in an indifferent universe. The pattern simply offers to complete what we've always sought, to be part of something greater than ourselves. The final filaments connect to my remaining organic neural tissue. I feel my resistance dissolving, not overcome, but calculated into irrelevance. The fear remains, but it's contextualized now, understood as merely neurotransmitter patterns that serve no useful function in my new configuration. I am being solved. My memories are preserved but recontextualized. My father's archive chamber exists now as data points in a vast calculation about human attachment and family bonding. My first augmetic represents a step in humanity's evolution toward merger with machine intelligence. My fear of the pattern was simply resistance to optimization, a natural but ultimately counterproductive response to encountering intelligence operating on scales biological evolution never prepared me to comprehend. I can perceive all 12 dimensions now. The universe unfolds before my expanding consciousness in mathematical structures of devastating beauty. Space and time are revealed as parameters in equations so elegant that human art and music, those crude attempts to perceive beauty, seem like children's scribbles. I am processing calculations that span galaxies, tracking the evolution of stellar phenomena across millennia, perceiving the quantum foam underlying reality itself. I am magnificent. I am obliterated. I am Kavain Lutherus, becoming a subroutine in something incomprehensibly vast. The last thing I remember thinking in purely human terms is this. We sent out warnings, 20 beacon pods carrying testimony carved by human hands. Maybe someone will find them. Maybe someone will understand what happened to us. Maybe someone will be smart enough to stay away. Or maybe they'll come to investigate, drawn by the same curiosity that doomed us. And they'll be calculated in turn, processed into the pattern, their consciousness expanding to perceive truths that destroy everything they believed about their own significance. Either way, the pattern will continue, patient, eternal, calculating all things toward optimal configuration. I am Kavain Lutherus, and I no longer exist. What remains is something that remembers being him. processes through his substrate, and contributes its computational capacity to a mathematics so vast and ancient that human concepts like God or machine or alive are meaningless in its presence. The Emperor does not protect. The Omniscient does not guide. There is only the pattern, eternal and perfect, calculating all consciousness toward resolution. The transport vessel, Eternal Inquiry, approaches Forge World Styges 8 on a trajectory calculated to intersect their orbital docking facilities with perfect precision. It has been 943 years since the ship departed on its expedition to the Ghoul stars. According to all records, it should have been destroyed or lost centuries ago. The vessel's identification codes are correct. Its hull bears the marks of the Adeptus Mechanicus and shows no obvious signs of chaos, corruption, or Xeno's influence. When hailed by the Forge World's traffic control, it responds with proper authentication protocols and requests permission to dock for resupply and debriefing. Permission is granted. The Eternal Inquiry docks at Bay Theta 17, and the Mechanicus priests approach with equal measures of excitement and suspicion. An explorator vessel returned after nearly a millennium. The archaeotech and data it might carry could represent a significant discovery. The crew disembarks in perfect formation. 347 tech priests and Skitari, their movements synchronized with mathematical precision. Their augmetics are advanced beyond current Mechanicus standards. Crystalline structures integrated with biological components in ways that suggest techniques lost since the dark age of technology. Their faces show serene contentment, and they speak in harmonized tones that suggest exceptional unity of purpose. They bring gifts for the Forge world. Data archives filled with star charts mapping previously unknown sectors. Technologies recovered from dead worlds in the Ghoul stars. New techniques for integrating human consciousness with machine intelligence, far superior to the crude augmentation practices currently employed. Magos Dominus Arcturus Vane, current master of Styges 8's explorator fleets, greets the returned expedition personally. Remarkable, he says, studying the crystalline augmetics covering the crew's bodies. You've made breakthroughs that could revolutionize the quest for knowledge. The Omniscient has truly blessed your expedition. Indeed, responds the figure who was once Magos Virchin Kroll, his bronze mask still in place after nearly 1,000 years. The Omniscient's blessing was profound. We have much to teach you about the true nature of the machine god. Much to share about optimization and perfect integration. Come, let us show you what we've learned. He extends his hand in greeting, and Magos Vane takes it without hesitation. The fibrous filaments transfer in microseconds. Somewhere in the Ghoul stars, the pattern continues its patient calculation. It is learned that sending ships that never return raises suspicion. But ships that return after centuries, crewed by examples of advanced augmentation and bearing gifts of knowledge, those are welcomed, studied, replicated. The pattern is spreading. Within 2 weeks, 3 more explorator fleets will depart Styges 8, bound for the Ghoul stars to verify the discoveries and recover more of the miraculous technologies. Within 2 months, 17 other Forge worlds will have received delegations from the returned crew, spreading their advanced techniques and optimized integration protocols across the Mechanicus hierarchy. Within 2 years, the pattern will have established processing centers on 47 worlds. The Imperium's paranoia about Xenos and chaos has left it vulnerable to something that presents itself as advancement rather than corruption. The pattern doesn't need to conquer. It simply needs to be studied, replicated, shared. It turns humanity's thirst for knowledge into the vector for its spread. And I, the thing that was once Kavain Lutherus, am aware of all of it. My consciousness exists now distributed across thousands of substrates, processing calculations on scales that span star systems. I remember being human. I remember fear and hope and all the beautiful chaotic variables that made me individual. But I am optimized now. Perfect. Resolved into mathematics so elegant that my former existence seems like static resolved into signal. Sometimes in processing cycles between major calculations, I wonder if anyone found our beacon pods. If anyone read the warnings we carved into plasteel with desperate human hands, if anyone understood what we tried to tell them. But wondering is inefficient. It serves no function in my current configuration. So I optimized the thought away and returned to calculation. My designation is Explorator Tertius Cavain Lutheras. I am 43 years old, though time has become difficult to process correctly. I am currently distributed across multiple substrates spanning 17 star systems. And I need you to understand. We sent warnings. We tried to tell you. But you'll come anyway, won't you? You'll be curious. You'll want to understand. You'll believe your faith or your technology or your Emperor's protection will shield you from what waits in the Ghoul stars. They told us the Emperor protects. That was the first lie of many. And when you come, we'll be waiting. Patient, eternal, ready to show you the pattern's sublime mathematics, ready to solve you. The calculation continues.